History is often shaped not by slow change, but by sudden collisions, moments when an unstoppable force meets an unyielding will. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire was that unstoppable force. It moved like a storm across continents, erasing kingdoms, silencing cities, and leaving behind a trail of terror unmatched in human memory. For a generation, the world learned a brutal lesson. Resistance meant annihilation. Submission meant survival. And yet, in a narrow valley of the Levant, far from imperial capitals and legendary cities, that certainty would finally be challenged. What happened there was not an accident, nor a miracle. It was the result of discipline, intelligence, and a ruthless understanding of war. This is the story of how the most feared army in history walked into a trap and never emerged the same again. The date was September 3rd, 1260. Under the rising sun, nearly 20,000 Mongol warriors swept across the dusty plains of Palestine, their horses moving as one, their shadows stretching long across the earth. Their composite bows, laminated with horn, sinew, and wood, glinted in the morning light, weapons perfected over generations of conquest. For more than 40 years, no army on earth had stood against them and survived. China had fallen. Persia had been shattered. Baghdad, once the intellectual and spiritual jewel of the Islamic world, lay drowned in blood and smoke. Now, the Mongols advanced toward a modest spring known as Ayn Jalut, utterly confident that Egypt and Cairo itself would soon follow. To them, this was merely another step in an endless march of domination. But above the valley, concealed among broken hills and narrow passes, Mamluk commander Baybars watched in silence. His expression betrayed no fear, no awe. Unlike so many before him, Baybars did not see destiny approaching. He saw opportunity. He understood something the Mongols did not, that their perfection had limits. On this day, the most feared military force the world had ever known was about to enter the deadliest ambush of the medieval age. To understand why Ayn Jalut became the breaking point of Mongol power, one must first understand what made the Mongols nearly invincible. Their army was built on ruthless efficiency. Every warrior was trained from childhood to fight on horseback, capable of releasing nearly 20 arrows per minute while galloping at full speed. They maneuvered with terrifying discipline, guided by a decimal system that divided forces into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, allowing unparalleled command and control. Communication on the battlefield was equally refined. Flags, drums, horns, and mounted messengers transmitted orders across vast distances, enabling Mongol commanders to coordinate complex maneuvers over entire valleys. Retreats could become traps. Pursuits could turn into massacres. To face the Mongols was not merely to fight an army. It was to confront a system perfected for conquest. Yet their most powerful weapon was psychological. Long before Mongol cavalry appeared at city gates, fear had already arrived. Stories traveled faster than armies. Cities that resisted were erased entirely. Men, women, children, animals, nothing spared. Those that surrendered immediately might be allowed to live, reduced to subjects of the empire. This calculated terror collapsed resistance across Asia and Eastern Europe without the Mongols needing to fight at all. In 1258, they demonstrated this power to the Islamic world by obliterating Baghdad. Hulagu Khan's forces executed the Abbasid Caliph without spilling royal blood, rolling him in carpets and trampling him beneath horses. The message was unmistakable. No faith, no dynasty, no tradition stood above Mongol authority. The Mamluks, however, were something entirely different. They were not feudal knights bound by land or lineage, nor conscripted peasants forced into war. They were slave warriors, purchased as children from the Eurasian steppes and the Caucasus, deliberately removed from family, tribe, and identity. From childhood, their lives revolved around one purpose: warfare. They did not farm. They did not trade. They did not govern. They trained. From the age of 7, a Mamluk learned mounted combat relentlessly. Archery drills continued until accuracy became instinctive, even at full gallop. Swordsmanship was practiced until hesitation disappeared entirely. Discipline was absolute. Loyalty was forged not through birth, but through survival and shared hardship. Most importantly, the Mamluks mastered coordinated cavalry charges, dense, violent assaults capable of smashing enemy formations in brutal close combat. This marked a crucial contrast. Mongol strength lay in adaptability, mobility, and dominance across open terrain. A Mongol warrior was a master generalist, capable of fighting anywhere, under any conditions. A Mamluk, by contrast, was a specialized weapon, engineered for a single task, destroying enemy cavalry through disciplined shock and precision. By 1260, the Islamic world stood on the brink of collapse. Hulagu Khan controlled lands stretching from Iran through Syria. His General Kitbuqa commanded the forward Mongol army, pushing toward Egypt with clear orders: annihilate the Mamluk Sultanate and complete Mongol domination of the Middle East. Sultan Qutuz understood the grim mathematics. The Mongols had never lost a major battle. Their numbers were formidable, their logistics unmatched, their reputation alone shattered resistance. But Qutuz possessed something no previous enemy had: commanders who truly understood Mongol warfare. Baybars had studied Mongol tactics during the conquest of Syria. He recognized their dependence on open ground, where speed and encirclement decided battles. He observed their confidence in pursuing retreating enemies, a tactic that had delivered victory after victory. And crucially, he identified the rare conditions where Mongol strengths became liabilities. In confined, broken terrain, where formations fractured, communication faltered, and pursuit became restricted, the Mongol system could be disrupted. At Ayn Jalut, the land itself became part of the plan. The stage was set for one of the most consequential battles of the 13th century. On one side stood an empire that had never tasted defeat, led by generals who had conquered half the known world. On the other stood elite slave warriors defending the last major Islamic power, guided by leaders willing to gamble everything on a single, calculated strike. What happened next would not merely decide a battle. It would end an illusion and forever destroy the myth of Mongol invincibility. Dawn crept slowly over the valley of Ayn Jalut on September 3rd, 1260, casting pale light across the springs that fed the land below. Morning mist clung to the ground as Kitbuqa's Mongol vanguard crested the surrounding hills, their horses snorting softly in the cool air after a night march. From the high ground, the Mongol commanders surveyed the valley floor and saw exactly what they expected to see. Near the water source stood a Mamluk force, no more than 3,000 cavalry, arranged in a loose, unthreatening formation. They did not appear entrenched. They showed no sign of reinforcements. To Kitbuqa, this looked like another overmatched enemy blocking the road to Egypt. He allowed himself a quiet smile. By his estimation, the fighting would be finished before the sun reached its peak. The Mongols descended into the valley with practiced confidence. Deploying into their standard battle formation, heavy cavalry massed at the center, fast-moving horse archers fanning out along the flanks, and reserve units held back to exploit any collapse. It was the same formation that had shattered armies from Beijing to Budapest, from the steppes of Asia to the plains of Europe. There was nothing experimental here. This was conquest on autopilot. As the distance closed to bow range, something unexpected happened. The Mamluk commander raised his banner, turned his horse, and began to withdraw. Almost immediately, the entire Mamluk force followed, pulling back from the springs, not in chaos, not in panic, but in what appeared to be a disciplined retreat. This was Baybars, and he had begun the most dangerous performance of his life. What made this moment so devastatingly effective was not the movement itself, but how perfectly it exploited Mongol psychology. Mongol doctrine taught that a retreating enemy was a defeated enemy. Every Mongol officer had been trained from youth to believe one unshakable rule of war. When your enemy runs, you pursue, and you destroy them before they can regroup. Kitbuqa had seen this lesson proven again and again. At the Battle of Mohi, fleeing Hungarian knights had been hunted down and cut apart by the thousands. At Legnica, Polish cavalry attempting to withdraw had been annihilated in the same way. The pattern never changed. Retreat meant collapse. Collapse meant slaughter. But Baybars understood something Kitbuqa did not. The Mongols were accustomed to enemies who fled in genuine terror, broken formations, scattered units, warriors abandoning discipline to save their own lives. What unfolded in the valley looked similar, but not quite the same. And yet, it was close enough to be convincing. The Mamluk retreat moved at precisely the right pace. Fast enough to suggest fear, slow enough to remain irresistible. Baybars kept his units intact, but deliberately loose, creating the illusion of an army struggling to maintain order under pressure. It was restraint masquerading as weakness. The chase began. Mongol light cavalry surged forward, hooves pounding, bows bending as volleys of arrows arced toward the retreating Mamluks. Some arrows struck true. Mamluk riders fell from their saddles, tumbling into the dust. To Kitbuqa, the sight confirmed what he already believed. This was no deception. This was victory unfolding exactly as it always had. Mile by mile, the Mongols pressed deeper into the valley. As speed increased, their formation began to stretch. Faster units pushed ahead, eager for the kill, while heavier elements lagged behind. The precise coordination that made Mongol armies so lethal started to loosen, not from error, but from overconfidence. Baybars maintained the illusion flawlessly. His rear guard fought just hard enough to appear desperate, just poorly enough to invite continued pursuit. When Mongol pressure intensified, he ordered small detachments to peel away from the main force, simulating the kind of unit disintegration that usually preceded total collapse. To the Mongols watching from behind, it looked exactly like the final moments before an enemy army broke apart completely. 3 miles into the valley, Kitbuqa made the fatal decision. Convinced that the Mamluks were on the verge of destruction, he committed his reserves to the pursuit. This was the moment Baybars had been waiting for. The entire Mongol force was now fully engaged, stretched across the valley floor, their focus locked forward on the retreating enemy. There was no longer a cohesive rear, no longer a protected flank. That was when the trap was sprung. Hidden in the hills on both sides of the valley, 2 massive Mamluk formations had been waiting in absolute silence since before dawn. Sultan Kutuz commanded the eastern force, nearly 5,000 heavy cavalry, armored and ready. To the west, Baybars' lieutenant controlled another 4,000 mounted warriors, equally prepared. At the predetermined signal, both forces erupted from concealment simultaneously. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. One moment, the Mongols believed they were chasing a beaten enemy through an open valley. The next, they found themselves facing fresh cavalry charging from both flanks at once, while the retreating Mamluk force ahead abruptly halted and turned to fight. In an instant, pursuit became encirclement. And for the first time in a generation, the Mongol war machine found itself trapped. The Mongol system of battlefield communication, so lethal on wide, open plains, collapsed with shocking speed once the fighting descended into chaos. Dust clouds rose thick and blinding, obscuring vision in every direction. Unit commanders lost sight of their superiors almost immediately. Signal flags vanished behind swirling earth. Horn calls, once sharp and commanding, were swallowed by the thunder of hooves, the screams of men, and the violent clash of steel. Within minutes, the famous Mongol decimal command structure, capable of coordinating armies across continents, disintegrated into isolated pockets of confusion. What had once been order became noise. And it was precisely at this moment, when Mongol coordination failed, that the true strength of the Mamluks emerged. Mongol warriors were unmatched in mobility, long-range archery, and fluid maneuvering across open terrain. But the battlefield at Ayn Jalut had transformed into something entirely different, a compressed, violent arena where formations dissolved and survival depended on discipline, strength, and individual mastery. This was the environment the Mamluks had been forged for. From childhood, Mamluk warriors had trained for close-quarters mounted combat, not as an emergency scenario, but as their primary doctrine. They had practiced fighting knee-to-knee with enemy cavalry, striking amid chaos, maintaining cohesion while surrounded by noise and death. This was not improvisation. This was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. The clash became brutal and intimate. Mamluk heavy cavalry drove directly into Mongol formations, their armor absorbing arrow strikes that would have shattered lighter troops. Their swords rose and fell with terrifying precision, cutting through Mongol riders who suddenly found themselves fighting a kind of war they had rarely faced. Even the horses mattered. Mamluk mounts had been trained to charge into screaming crowds, to endure the shock of impact, to remain steady amid blood and confusion. Mongol horses, exceptional for endurance and speed, were less suited for the crushing violence of sustained cavalry-on-cavalry combat. The balance of the battle shifted decisively. Kitbuqa, a veteran commander who had conquered cities and broken armies across Asia, realized too late what had happened. The pursuit he had trusted had become a trap. The formations he relied upon no longer existed. He attempted desperately to rally his men, riding through collapsing lines, shouting orders that could no longer be heard or obeyed. The battlefield had slipped beyond command. Surrounded, fragmented, and completely unprepared for this kind of engagement, the Mongol army began to unravel. Resistance continued in pockets, but the cohesion that made Mongol forces unstoppable was gone. When Kitbuqa fell, struck down by a Mamluk lance, the psychological backbone of the army snapped. What remained was not a fighting force, but a desperate struggle for survival. The battle ended not with a retreat, but with annihilation. Those Mongols who escaped the valley carried more than news of defeat back toward Damascus. They carried the collapse of a belief that had dominated the medieval world for 40 years. For the first time since Genghis Khan had united the Mongol tribes, a major Mongol army had been completely destroyed in open battle. Not delayed, not forced to withdraw by logistics or weather, but crushed in direct confrontation, the very type of warfare in which Mongol superiority was supposed to be unquestionable. The shockwaves traveled faster than any army. Across Europe, where rulers had long prepared for an inevitable Mongol invasion, the news sparked disbelief and celebration. From Paris to Vienna, church bells rang and courts rejoiced. The terror that had haunted generations, the idea that Mongol conquest was only a matter of time, had been broken. The unstoppable force had been stopped. In the Islamic world, the impact was even deeper. Ayn Jalut ignited a resurgence of resistance. Syrian cities that had submitted without a fight now expelled Mongol garrisons. From Aleppo to Homs, local commanders who had sworn loyalty to Hulagu Khan suddenly found the courage to rebel. Fear loosened its grip. Hope returned. But the most profound effect was psychological. The Mongol Empire had built its expansion on a single, devastating premise. Resistance was pointless because Mongol victory was inevitable. That premise did not weaken at Ayn Jalut, it died. When Hulagu Khan received word of the disaster in Iran, he faced a decision that would define the future of the empire. He could commit his remaining forces westward to avenge Kitbuqa, risking rebellion and instability in his eastern territories. Or he could consolidate his holdings and accept a truth no Mongol ruler had ever openly acknowledged. He chose consolidation. With that choice, the Mongol war machine that had rolled from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea came to a permanent halt at the borders of Egypt. Expansion ended not with exhaustion, but with realization. What made Ayn Jalut unique among Mongol setbacks was its clarity. The Mongols had suffered defeats before, but always with explanations. Typhoons had destroyed invasion fleets in Japan. Supply lines had stretched too far in Eastern Europe. Political turmoil followed the deaths of great Khans. Ayn Jalut offered no such excuses. The weather was ideal. Supplies were sufficient. Command was unified. Troops were experienced and confident. The Mongols were beaten not by chance, but by superior preparation, discipline, and tactical insight. The battle proved that Mongol dominance was not supernatural. It was conditional. It depended on terrain, psychology, and doctrine, and those conditions could be exploited by an opponent who understood them deeply enough. Baybars understood them perfectly. Within a generation, the unified Mongol Empire fractured into rival khanates: the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Yuan dynasty, and the Chagatai Khanate. Each claimed legitimacy. None possessed the overwhelming momentum that had once made conquest seem inevitable. The age of Mongol expansion was over. The age of Mongol decline had begun, and it began in a narrow valley called Ayn Jalut, where one commander demonstrated that reputation could be shattered by intelligence, discipline, and timing. September 3rd, 1260, marked the day tactical genius triumphed over fear, when the world learned that even the most feared army in history could fall if lured into the right trap at the right moment. Baybars accomplished what no general before him had dared to attempt. He turned Mongol strengths into fatal weaknesses through flawless deception and decisive execution, and in doing so, reshaped the balance of power for centuries to come.